Recently, I picked up and finished Vanillaware's magnum opus, 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim. This video is not about that. On the back of Sentinel's North American box art, Odin's Sphere and Dragon's Crown are mentioned on Vanillaware's resume, but Muramasa the Demon Blade is nowhere to be found. Understandably so, as Odin's Sphere and Dragon's Crown are Vanillaware's landmark titles, selling hundreds pound thousands of units, and also paved the groundwork for their games for years to come. But I couldn't help but feel a little sad seeing this piece of marketing text on the back of the box. Muramasa the Demon Blade is a game I feel is largely forgotten, but still fondly remembered by those who have experienced it. And how could they forget Honshu's sights, fights, and sweet sounds? Muramasa's edge has not dulled in the almost 12 years that it's been released, and has only been sharpened due to the release of the PS Vita port, Muramasa Rebirth. So today, let's unsheath our blade and cut deep into Muramasa Rebirth, and even the Wii version, seeing what they have to offer. Countless demon blades are strewn about the world. Once one of these blades is drawn from its sheath, they immediately begin thirsting for blood. Witness the fates of those who fell prey to their power. The balance of Genroku-era 17th century Japan is thrown all out of whack due to the existence of cursed swords, forged by legendary swordsmith Muramasa Demon Blade. The main conflict of the game revolves around the existence of these swords, dooming the people who draw them down a path of misery and violence. Two such people are Kisuke and Momohime, the protagonists of the game. These two don't necessarily share a story, but rather have standalone tales that are connected. Kisuke and Momohime do in fact cross paths, and maybe a little bit more, but their main link is the titular demon blades and their mastery of the Oboro sword style. Despite this, both scenarios are both halves of a greater whole that temper the steel of Muramasa's narrative. In Momohime's tale, Pandemonium of the Demon Blade, the meek Narukami clan princess is entangled in a conspiracy that is much greater than her. She wakes up having already been killed by a rogue ninja named Jinkuro, who accidentally whacked Momohime instead of her betrothed Yukinojo. Jinkuro was attempting to transfer his soul onto Yukinojo in order to ensure the legendary Oboro style lives on. As a result of this botched mind transfer jutsu, Jinkuro's spirit is now in Momohime's body. Together with Kitsune guide Kongiku and Momohime's floating spirit, Jinkuro travels across Japan to finish what he started. Out of the two stories, I find this one to flesh out the world of Muramasa the most. As Momohime is, or was, a princess of the high-ranking Narukami clan, we as the player get to learn about the game's fictional politics, as well as religion and culture. We learn of the filth and grime at the top brass who only thirst for power and think of Momohime as a tool. We also learn of the game's heavy use of Buddhism, as many of the monks trying to bonk Jinkuro practice it. Buddhism seems to be the prevailing religion in this era as well, as there are temples dedicated to its practice. There are also structures and enemies that evoke Buddhist imagery as well. Buddhism also bleeds into the game's themes too, as the cycle of death and the path of rebirth are the crux of both narratives. Pandemonium of the Demon Blade has the most substance of the two routes in my opinion, but that doesn't make Kisuke be any worse off. If Momohime's route is the soul of Muramasa, Kisuke's story, Ninja Scroll of the Demon Blade, is Muramasa's beating heart. Kisuke awakens with no memories one day, only knowing that he knows the Oboro style, and that he is on the run for his crimes. Desperate to know the truth, Kisuke then embarks on a journey across Honshu with fox pal Yuzuruha. He then finds out that Yukinojo, Momohime's husband-to-be, employed him and his former crew to steal a Muramasa the Demon Blade from the Narukami clan. The Narukami clan, as we know, is Momohime's family, and her sister Torahime is a central figure in Kisuke's route. As the mystery of Kisuke's lost memories continues to unravel, we learn of the bond that he and Torahime share, the treachery lurking in the shadows, and the friends we made along the way. Overall, Muramasa's narrative is super cool to me. I found the conflict surrounding these cursed swords to be compelling, as the two protagonists end up being pawns in their schemes. Despite it all, Kisuke and Momohime cut a path to their own destinies with their own hands, and seek to put an end to the violence themselves. The moment-to-moment gameplay of Muramasa is the game's greatest strength. In the non-combat sections, the game will have you exploring small areas or doing light platforming to snag collectibles such as spirits and items. There are also village sections where you can talk to NPCs, eat at restaurants, and also buy items. One thing I recommend while playing Muramasa is to not play it on an empty stomach, because everything that you eat in this game looks freaking delicious. Later on in the game, you get the ability to cook your own meals using materials that you can either buy or hunt for, and oh my god, all the food looks so delicious. You can even literally return to Monkey by following these little fellas into a hot spring for a full heal, and occasionally a conversation with an NPC. I like to think of these as the chill reflective bits, where you get to take in the game's gorgeous hand-drawn visuals and soundtrack. This is also reflected in the fact that you cannot draw your sword and fight at all in these sections. These non-combat bits take up a bulk of the gameplay, as there's a lot of walking from point A to point B. So while I think people may not like all the backtracking, I personally enjoyed taking in all the vibes a new area had to offer. There is fast travel, but it's limited until you complete both stories. For example, my favorite area of the game is in Momohime's route. In this area, a couple hours in, you explore a seedy red light district illuminated by many lanterns atop their towering brothels. Cherry blossom petals fall in the background, and we can also see the trees they come from gently swaying with the breeze. The lanterns that line the towers are also wobbling with the wind. You can see people enjoying Musashi's nightlife shuffling the streets in the foreground and also the background. From outside the windows, you can see many patrons going about their business too. Inside the brothels are some enemy encounters, but also customers who tell their own stories about their time in there. So while this isn't unique to this area, you can actually encounter malicious spirits when you jump into some of these buildings. The reason why I wanted to include this is because after you pass through the boss door, you can actually speak to a spirit that isn't harmful. This spirit actually being Jinkuro's favorite courtesan, which I found was really cool. This culminates in a boss battle against a Japanese yokai named the Wanyudo, who has been stealing spirits of the courtesans, leaving them unable to properly rest in peace. The Red Light District stuck out to me not just because it features my favorite music in the game, but because to me, it's a perfect example of what the game has to offer. The environment itself paints a picture of Muramasa's world through its storytelling. It gives the player an idea of what people with money to burn in this country like to do once the sun sets and the lanterns are lit. This isn't the only area like this, as there are many more beautifully drawn locations that tell their own stories. Even though I loved hoofing it and sightseeing around Muramasa's world, the exploration parts aren't my favorite part of the game. My favorite part is actually damn, Jinkuro wasn't lying. That Oboro sword style really do be legendary. The combat sections are where Muramasa truly shines. When controlling Kisuke and Momohime, you have one primary attack button to use for your sword strikes. Normal katana are much faster, but lack that punch that the slower longswords pack. Whichever you use as the player is up to you, meaning there are different swipes for different folks. The game gives you the freedom to equip up to 3 of any type at any time, and you can switch between them in combat. Additionally, each blade comes with a secret art that can be used, that consumes a blade's spirit power dictated by the gauge up top. These all vary in usage but are undeniably useful for getting you out of a jam. Switching swords also lets you use the super stylish quick draw, which attacks every enemy on the screen. The spice in the combat comes from the directional inputs. Pressing down in the attack button will do a swipe at the enemy's feet for hot damage. Up in the attack button gives you a rising slash, popping the foes up in the air. There's also a sword dash that can be performed in the air up to 3 times by holding right in the attack button. This is some maximum spider shit. There's a few more I haven't covered, but this should give you an idea of just how many uses you can get out of a single button press. The fun comes in experimenting with that button and crafting your own combo trees. The player's defensive options come in the form of a dodge, a manual block button, and a parry that'll deflect incoming projectiles. Blocking and parrying have to be used sparingly as they also consume a blade's spirit power, and once that gauge is completely depleted, a blade will break and is basically a butter knife until it recharges. You never want to be in a situation where one or more of your blades is broken, as it puts you at a massive disadvantage. Getting out of a scrape means knowing your options and using them effectively, whether it be going fully offensive or taking a second to use a consumable to heal. I know I've been praising the combat a lot for being cool and having a lot of options, but you really can just get by on Legend or normal mode by mashing your attack button. That's why I recommend playing on Chaos mode, which cranks the difficulty up a notch and really has you learning and understanding Muramasa's systems. All the footage I've recorded is from the game's Chaos mode, but I will be splicing in some Wii clips later from Legend mode. So Chaos is not hard to the point of frustrating, but it isn't easy to the point of mindless button mashing. It is the blade's sweet spot, like a Marth tipper. Mwah. Fury also exists for masochists, giving you 1 health point and putting everything you've learned to the test. Character progression comes in the form of a leveling system and blade forging. As you gain experience and level up, your stats rise, allowing you to forge and wield powerful new blades with the help of Senji Muramasa himself. You can't actually forge new blades until you get enough souls through combat, and spirit through world map exploration or eating. Gaining new powerful swords will give you an edge in combat, and you'll be constantly making new ones to stay on your toes. With all of these systems combined, Muramasa forms a well-oiled machine. Exploring to find spirits and collectibles, eating at restaurants, fighting to gain experience, and forging blades is the core loop, and everything is linked with each other. I've spoken a lot about Muramasa the Demon Blade so far, but almost all the footage I've presented so far is from the Vita port, Muramasa Rebirth. Muramasa the Demon Blade is actually the original version of the game, released on the Wii in 2009. I played through the entirety of Rebirth, forging all 108 blades and seeing all 6 endings. For comparison's sake, I finished both Kisuke and Momohime's routes in Demon Blade, which encompasses most of the game. The small quality of life changes made to Rebirth make it the definitive version to me. First, let's talk about the PlayStation Vita. The team chose it over the other 7th gen consoles because they believed the Vita screen would complement the game's color palette, and I wholeheartedly agree. I recorded all my footage on a Vita TV, and I could say that its presentation paled in comparison to the Vita Loca itself. Upside, inside, and also out. The Wii version looked fine on the original hardware, but the colors were a bit washed out and looked muddy overall. Next, the Vita port lets you remap buttons freely, giving you more flexibility with your inputs. In Demon Blade, you have the option of playing with the Wiimote and Nunchuck, Classic Controller, and also GameCube Controller. So while you can do full hop nairs with it, you can't turn tap jump off. That's because the Wii version doesn't have remappable controls. Out of both versions though, I enjoyed playing Rebirth a lot more. I think it's because DualShock and Vita controls feel a lot more natural to me. Although chiefly, Rebirth is the definitive version for 2 very important reasons. The first being that the localization was redone to closely resemble the Japanese original script. The Wii localization done by Ignition Entertainment was not bad by any means, but it was more of a literal translation of the Japanese script. As a result, it does come across as a little plain. Aksys Games handled the Rebirth localization and they put some sazon on that shit. The text was changed and spiced up to have much more flavor than the original Wii version. For example, Muso and Shura modes are now Legend and Chaos. Blade names were changed to give them a more poetic feel. Dialogue was rewritten to be much more elaborate as well. Having played both versions, I prefer the Aksys localization over the Ignition one. The second reason Rebirth is a definitive version to me is for its DLC, Genroku Legends. Priced at 5 bones each, these smaller side stories help further flesh out Muramasa's world, as they center around other characters unfortunate enough to get wrapped up in its conflicts. Genroku Legends even adds more to the existing lore established in the Demon Blade. My favorite of the 4 is Fishy Tales of the Nekomata, which is about a woman named Okoi who is traveling with her brother to deliver a tea bowl to their father, and then they both get whacked. She then swears revenge on her assassins and in her dying breath forms a dangerous pact with a Nekomata. Now reborn, Okoi goes on a vengeance-fueled rampage. Basically, it's Revengeance with catgirls. Okoi functions the same as the other 2 protagonists from the base game, and the same can be said about the other characters for the DLC, but is physically frailer compared to them. In exchange, she feels a little faster, being able to output light damage very quickly. Okoi can also turn into a cat to chuck projectiles, and even more cats, at her foes. We also get to explore another red light district, in Musashi again. I think it's actually the same one. The big difference being is that it's a ghost town by the day, which gives my earlier theory some water. There's also a tanuki that slaps you with its giant nuts. Dude is chillin'. The only real downside to these side stories is that they're very short, only being a fraction of the main game. However, for their price, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. We get new amazing songs, super fun and vibrant characters, and more Muramasa. What's not to love? Muramasa is a game that is strictly Japanese in its identity, with every single strand of its DNA reflecting the culture. George Kamitani, the game's director, states that it draws its main inspiration from kabuki theater, famous for its colorful characters and enthralling dramas. It makes sense, as that art form was also flourishing in the Genroku period. The narrative is framed as such, with the chapters of the game being broken into acts and a storyteller closing out the tales once they're over. The main difference between the game's narrative and kabuki plays is that the plays follow a 5-act structure, and Muramasa's main stories are broken up into 8 acts. The art style of Muramasa also draws from Edo block prints, and it shows with every stroke. The game's producer, Yoshifumi Hashimoto, echoes these sentiments, saying that the game's motif is very Japanese. This is because there was great care taken to make sure it accurately portrayed the era and the setting that the game depicted, going as far as including delicacies popular in the Genroku period. Sushi with fatty tuna was considered dumpster tier in this era, and in-game, you can get it for cheap in the restaurants. Muramasa also draws heavily from Japanese folklore, featuring gods and creatures such as kappa, kitsune, and even yokai like the Yuki-onna. The game's Buddhist influences come from the fact that Kamitani didn't want to lean too into Japanese mythology, so he decided to implement it into the narrative and setting. Japanese culture and mythology and Buddhist theology harmonize very well in this game. Lastly, the soundsmiths at Base Escape were tasked with creating the game's soundtrack, and all of the composers carefully crafted what they felt was a Japanese sound. The soundtrack itself is an expression of Japanese culture, using many traditional instruments and sounds. As I pored over all these interviews, the one thing that stuck out to me was the meticulous attention to detail and the love of the project. The end result of Vanillaware's efforts is a blade forged from the flames of the team's passionate love of Japan and their culture. Dear viewer, if you couldn't tell, I adore this game very, very much. I have a very vivid memory of when I first heard of this game many moons ago. I must have been about 11 or 12 on vacation with my family in the Dominican Republic, and when I got tired of playing Lunar Silver Star Harmony, my dad would lend me his laptop to surf the net. I'd sit hunched over our grandmother's couch, browsing the now defunct game trailers, looking for games to beg my dad to buy me. The one thing that stuck out to me was Muramasa the Demon Blade. I remember feverishly waiting for the trailers to load on the slow internet and getting my mind blown at the game's visuals and soundtrack. I tucked that memory away in my back pocket, and bought Rebirth once I had a Vita, experiencing Muramasa for the first time. I would later buy a Wii copy 10 years later with my copy of Petzels. And once I got a DTOLF and a stable job last year, I bought the Momohime scale figure I'd wanted for half a decade, but could never afford. In a lot of ways, this review of Muramasa is a trip down memory lane for me. I got to revisit and deeply explore a game that I love to pieces and remember these little bits of my life that I'd all but forgotten. I'd also finally got to play the Wii version that I caught wind of on that warm summer night. Maybe my experiences might convince you into checking this game out, dear viewer. If you've got a Wii or a Vita, I highly recommend you check it out. I don't think you'd regret unsheathing Muramasa the Demon Blade from its cursed yet gorgeous scabbard. If you've made it to the end of the video, I thank you, and I deeply appreciate your patience. If you enjoyed it, consider liking the video, subbing to the channel, and sharing this with your friends. Consider following me on Twitter if you'd like to keep up with me. I also stream quite regularly on Twitch as well. Did you play Muramasa, or have a fun memory from when you picked up and played the game for the first time? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read all the comments and would love to hear from you, dear viewer. Special thanks again to Creamanata R for the Himawari Momohime piece. She knocked it out of the park again with this one. Drop a follow on her socials for more great artwork. I also want to extend another thank you to Adri, who I commissioned to draw me Himawari Momohime and also Tamamo no Mae as her Kitsune guide. This one's a pretty good piece too. Consider following Adri as well. But for now, this is Dragon Hustle signing off, reminding you to take care of yourself and to stay gold.
While you were partying, I studied the blade. When you were having premarital sex, I mastered the blockchain, while you wasted your days at the gym in pursuit of vanity. I